At noon almost every day, the finest fighter pilots in the world arrived over Guadalcanal on schedule and found the Americans already above them. Rabaul lay 556 miles behind them, 4 hours of open water, no landmarks, and fuel counted to the gallon. Ahead of them, Marines who should have been caught on the ground sat at 20,000 feet with the sun behind them, waiting. The Japanese looked for reasons. They suspected radar. They suspected spies inside the perimeter. They suspected their codes had been broken. The answer was 3 gray metal boxes under a tarpaulin on a hill in southern Bougainville, wired to a car battery and guarded by a plantation manager who had lived on that island for 20 years and had no intention of firing a shot at anyone. Japan owned every island between Rabaul and Guadalcanal. Japan could not see a single one of them. On the 5th of October, 1937, the Imperial Japanese Navy sent the same document to 2 companies. Mitsubishi received it. So did Nakajima. It asked for a carrier fighter capable of 310 mm at 13,000 feet, a climb to 3,000 meters, 2 20mm cannons, a wingspan under 12 meters so it would fit a carrier lift, and 6 to 8 hours of endurance on economical cruise with drop tanks. Range and turn-in speed in one airframe. On the 17th of January 1938 at Yokosuka, Nakajima's engineers said the thing couldn't be built and withdrew. That wasn't timidity. It was a firm protecting the only asset an engineering company really holds, which is being believed the next time it says something is possible. Mitsubishi's executives nearly did the same. Their chief designer talked them out of it. Jiro Horikoshi later described the requirement in his memoir as a demand for something that didn't exist. It read like a fighter problem. It was a weight problem. 5 years on, that airplane had carried the Imperial Navy across a third of the world, and its home in the South Pacific was Rabaul on New Britain. Rabaul housed the 5th Base Air Force. It also housed the Tainan Air Group, the most publicized fighter pilots in Japan, men whose names ran in newspapers at home. Against that, the Allies had Ferdinand. Ferdinand was run out of Melbourne by the Royal Australian Navy's intelligence branch under a commander named Eric Felt. He took the name from the children's book about the bull who sat under a tree and smelled the flowers instead of fighting. The name was an instruction. Watch, report, do not engage. His people were planters, district officers, and missionaries. Felt had them commissioned into the Naval Reserve on the thin hope that a uniform might turn an execution into a capture. Their equipment was an Australian teleradio, 3 metal boxes, and a 30-kilo petrol charging engine. Moving a camp took 12 to 16 men walking it up a jungle track, and the charger could be heard a long way through the trees. One of those systems had been designed, the other was assembled out of whoever refused to leave. Horikoshi already had standing before the Navy's document arrived. He designed the A-5M, the Navy's first operational monoplane fighter, and his method never changed. He didn't add strength, he removed mass. Lightning holes, thinner skins, a new alloy, extra superduralumin, developed by Sumitomo, stronger for its weight than anything Japan had put in an airframe. Every gram he took out came back as speed, as turn radius, as miles. Paul Mason had a comparable specialism, though nobody would have called it engineering. He'd run plantations in southern Bougainville for 20 years. He knew which ridges held cloud in the afternoon, which tracks flooded, which villages would feed a man, and which would report him. Jack Red was a district officer at Bougainville Passage in the north. When the administration collapsed and he needed operating money, he dynamited the office safe at Keita and took the cash into the bush. Mason was later airdropped pages torn out of Jane's fighting ships so he could name what he was looking at. He did accurately from a hillside for months. Neither man could be requisitioned. Neither could be replaced. Here is the trade Horikoshi made, and it is the whole story. To reach the endurance figure, he stripped the airplane of the things that keep a pilot alive. No armor plate behind the seat, no self-sealing fuel tanks. Structural margins cut down to the bone because the bone was exactly where he was working. Take that out of engineering and put it into people. A self-sealing tank isn't a weight saving. It's the difference between a punctured aircraft and a burning one. Deleting it is a decision that one hit in the wrong place ends the pilot rather than the sortie. Horikoshi's team understood that. So did the staff officers who wrote the requirement. They accepted it because Japanese engines of that generation couldn't produce the power to carry both protection and reach, and the Pacific is mostly distance. It was a rational choice made inside real constraints. Nobody in that room was a fool. Think of it as a ledger. Every gram removed went into one column, and that column balanced beautifully. The cost went into a second column nobody totaled because nobody expected the war to run long enough for it to matter. There was another entry in that second column, and it had nothing to do with armor. An aircraft flying 556 miles to a target and 556 miles home is working at the edge of its fuel. It can't leave early, it can't leave late, it can't loiter, can't detour, can't come at dawn, and can't come at dusk because it has to launch after first light and land before dark with a 4-hour leg at each end. The distance didn't only give the Zero its reach, it gave it a timetable. The Marines named it. The historian of the 67th Fighter Squadron wrote it down. Tojo time. Almost every day between roughly 11:30 Shush and 20:30, the bombers came. Not because Japanese commanders lacked imagination, but because of arithmetic. On the 7th of August 1942, both systems were tested in a single afternoon. 18 Zeros of the Tainan Air Group lifted off Rabaul to escort bombers against the American landing at Guadalcanal. 556 miles each way, the longest fighter escort mission anyone had flown in the war to that point. The bombers went out carrying bombs rather than torpedoes, sent as they stood by Rear Admiral Yamada, who judged speed worth more than the right weapon. At 10:30 that morning, Paul Mason watched them pass over his hill and sent 8 words. From STO, 24 torpedo bombers headed yours. STO was his sister's initials. He was wrong about the torpedoes. He was right about everything that mattered. By the time the formation arrived, the transports were underway and scattered, and the fighters were already up. Saburo Sakai flew home that day with a head wound and the sight gone in one eye. As he told it years afterwards, he put the Zero down at Rabaul and refused to be lifted out of the cockpit until he'd made his report. Both sides came back, believing they had proved something. Only one of them had. The Zero's dominance in that period was real, and it has to be said plainly because the story collapses if you pretend otherwise. It outturned everything the Allies could put up. It arrived with fuel left to fight. Its pilots were in 1942 the most experienced naval aviators alive. The first column had balanced. The Tainan Air Group came home from the 7th of August, claiming 43 American aircraft destroyed. The real American loss was around 10. That gap is the wedge. Rabaul was reading its own reports, and Rabaul had reason to believe the islands under the flight path held no hostile eyes. Japan held Bougainville. Japan held Buka, Santa Isabel, New Georgia. Occupation on a map looks exactly like possession. So when staff officers sat down to work out how the Americans kept getting above them, they weighed the options available to a modern Air Force. Forward radar, an agent inside the perimeter, compromised codes. Nobody said planters. Meanwhile, in California, the question was being closed from the other end. A Zero had come down largely intact in the Aleutians and been recovered in the middle of July. By the 20th of September, a U.S. Navy test pilot named Eddie Sanders was flying it in American markings at San Diego. The finding out of those flights is the quiet part of this whole story. The aircraft performed in substance exactly as Allied intelligence had already described it. The mystery had never been the airplane. The turn came in 4 stages, and not one of them was a secret weapon. The first stage was geometric. 556 miles fixed the arrival window between about 11:30 and 14:30, and the shape of the Solomons funneled the formations down the same corridor of water the Americans called the slot. Predictable hour, predictable line. The second stage was human. Mason above Buin on Malaita Hill, Red at Porapora overlooking Buka Passage, Martin Clemens running scouts on Guadalcanal itself, Donald Kennedy holding Segi Point on New Georgia. Every one of them inside ground Japan believed it controlled. How much warning they bought is genuinely disputed. Australian accounts say roughly 2 hours out of Bougainville. American accounts as little as 45 minutes once a message had been relayed and confirmed. On the 2nd of September 1942, an SCR-270B air search radar reached Henderson Field, good for about 150 miles. It didn't replace the men in the hills, it sat on top of them. The third stage was tactical. Warning is worthless unless you can convert it, and what the Marines converted it into was altitude. A Wildcat with 90 minutes notice is above the bombers with the sun behind it. A Wildcat with 10 minutes is climbing underneath them, slow and finished. That was the entire margin. On the 2nd of October 1942, when the warning didn't come, Cactus lost 6 Wildcats and killed 1 Zero. 6 for 1 on the day the system failed. The fourth stage was attritional. A Japanese pilot shot down over Guadalcanal was 556 miles from home, over water, with nothing behind his seat and nothing in the tank to stop a fire. He was gone. An American pilot who went into the sea or the jungle stood a real chance of being found by Solomon Islanders and walked back to his squadron. Felt's accounting credits at least 321 Allied airmen and 280 sailors recovered behind Japanese lines across the campaign. Walter Lord's figure for pilots alone is lower, 118, and the honest position is that the exact number is contested. The direction isn't. One side was returning pilots to the line, the other was losing them permanently. The second column came due between August and November 1942. The Tainan Air Group lost 32 pilots killed. Junichi Sasai on the 26th of August, Toshio Ota on the 21st of October. On the 1st of November, the unit was redesignated the 241st and withdrawn to rebuild because there wasn't enough of it left to still be the Tainan Air Group. The Zero wasn't beaten by a better fighter. By late 1942, it hadn't even been beaten by a better pilot. Japan did eventually work out what was sitting on those hills. Troops went into the Bougainville bush after Mason with tracker dogs. New airfields rose at Buin and Kahili in November 1942 to shorten the flight. Night harassment replaced the noon raid. All of it was correct. All of it was late. On the 24th and 28th of July 1943, the submarine USS Guardfish surfaced off Bougainville and lifted Red and Mason off the island, along with the scouts and police who had kept them alive. Felt was already gone, invalided out in March, worn through. In 1946, he published his account of the organization, which is the reason most of this is known at all. Halsey put the verdict on the record. The Coast Watchers saved Guadalcanal, and Guadalcanal saved the South Pacific. The sentence survives in an Australian archive file. Jacob Vusa, the Solomon Islander scout who was taken by Japanese troops and refused to talk, was decorated by 2 nations and eventually knighted. He died in 1984. Horikoshi's ending is stranger, and it's the reason this story has no villain in it. In 1956, excerpts from his private wartime diary were published. In them, the man who designed the airplane that gave Japan its reach wrote that those who understood American industrial strength had never really believed Japan would win. Not afterwards, during. While Zeros were flying south from Rabaul at the outer edge of their fuel, the engineer who made that flight possible was privately certain it led nowhere. His factory at Nagoya burned. Mitsubishi was broken up, reassembled, renamed, and is still there building engines and turbines and ship components. Its name is on products that have nothing to do with any of this. The Zero survived too, after a fashion. A handful sit in museums, disarmed, roped off, immaculate. Stand beside one, and the first thing you notice is how small it is. The second is how thin. You can see the trade in the metal. And in Honiara, at the end of Commonwealth Street, there's a monument unveiled on the 7th of August, 2011. It's called Pride of Our Nation. 3 Solomon Islander scouts stand around one Coast Watcher. Halsey's line is carved on it. So is one from a Coast Watcher named John Keenan, who said that without local help, they wouldn't have lasted 10 minutes. 4 men in bronze. Not one of them ever shot down an aircraft. Japan's answer to distance is behind glass. The Allied answer is standing in a street. And the argument the 2 of them settled, whether reach beats eyes, whether the machine beats the network, is being had again right now in different rooms over different hardware. If this story changed the way you look at the hidden heroes of the Pacific, please subscribe and like the channel. We are dedicated to uncovering the history that time tried to bury. Help us plant the seeds for future discoveries. The next vault of history will be opened very soon. At noon almost every day, the finest fighter pilots in the world arrived over Guadalcanal on schedule, and the Americans were already above them.